So what am I going to read this year? This is sort of a TBR video or a reading plan. Some of this won't get read, extra stuff will get added. But the general idea, I mean, the last couple of years when I've done reading plans, I've got most of it done and then swapped out the remaining segment for different material. Last year I read 97 books via Goodreads, and obviously that's not always a one-to-one equivalent, is it? Because sometimes something's not listed, sometimes you list something that really is too short. Of that, about 70 was fiction. That's probably too much fiction for what else I usually need to read. So the balance will be redressed slightly this year. I'll probably end up, I imagine, reading, let's say, 50 fiction books this year. We will see, 50 or 55 or something like that. But I still have a list. I've got a plan, and I'm going to talk about what I'm going to be reading by category, kind of genre, that sort of thing, and maybe giving some of my expectations as well, and we'll see. And you can tell me what you think of the books I've picked. That'd be useful, and any cognate recommendations compared to the ones that I think I'm going to like. So first, I've got a section in my reading plan called Kids. Now this doesn't mean these are books that are kids books, though they are, or that are books that I'm only reading with the kids, though I am reading with them with the kids. That's why they're under that section. But yeah, they're sort of they are books I want to read that I am reading with the kids, or I'm going to read with the kids. And I've got a couple started already, possibly 3. The Railway Children by E. Nesbit, most of the way through. This I read just with my older son, and I've enjoyed it so far. It's a sort of sentimental and quite touching sort of thing, and it's not fantastic like the other books in terms of fantasy based like the other books I've read of hers, but it's delightful, you know, it's pleasant, and I expect I'll enjoy finishing it. It certainly tugs the heartstrings sometimes. Also by Nesbit, we haven't started this is we'll probably do it after that, the 3rd book in the Samiad trilogy, The Story of the Amulet. And with the sort of, the first 2 have their sort of silly and unstructured moments, but they are, again, good sentimental fiction, good moralising fiction, nice to talk about with the kids. We are halfway through the 2nd book in the Bromeliad. We've actually just had the eponymous Bromeliad mentioned. We're in Diggers at the moment, and then we've got Wings, and it's Terry Pratchett. It's been good so far. It will be good. He is definitely an author, as with the author I'm about to mention, where the content is never inappropriate, but certainly sometimes you have to be like, okay, so this is a theme that's quite heavy, or an idea that's quite big, or, you know, I'm not sure if I agree with that or not. You know, basically thoughtful authors make you think and challenge you, and you disagree with them, and then that's something that when you're reading with your kids, you have to translate that, because you know, you don't want to always leave these things uncommentated, but you also want your kids to have their own chance to respond, and then you can have a conversation. The other author is Toby Jansen. This is Memoirs on Moomin Papa. I think this is Moomin's 4 of the books. Jansen is, the world building is beautiful, not necessarily deep and clever, but really wonderful, fantastic, endlessly inventive, massively enjoyable. And I've no doubt, we've read 2 together. My wife has read the whole series with the boys, and we're doing reread, and I'm looking forward to it. You know, I'm looking forward to a book I haven't read, and exploring more of that Moomin's world. So the kids section is stuff where I think I just expect it'll all be good. Equally, apart from the Bromeliad, perhaps none of it is stuff that is I'm off the chain excited about. You know, it's stuff that I know we'll enjoy together. Let's have a look at the sci-fi next. The sci-fi genre. One book of this is upstairs, and one book I don't have, one book I just forgot to get, and one book I haven't received yet, but we'll try our best. So first, imagine I'm holding Hyperion Cantos 4, The Rise of Endymion, unless it is here. Can I see it? Nope, don't think so. The Rise of Endymion, the least well reviewed of the 4 generally, but some people still think it's okay, and I enjoyed number 3. It wasn't amazing, but it was pretty good. So I want to finish the Hyperion Cantos. I want to know the end of the story. I like Dan Simmons. I trust his basic writing skills. I think structurally, if we look at number 3, we may be in for a slog or a bit of a struggle, but we'll see. Next, a book I'm going to read pretty soon, maybe this month, Hominids by Robert J. Sawyer, which is a kind of parallel universe thing where a guy in another universe who's a Neanderthal but also an astrophysicist, pierces the barrier between worlds and comes into our universe. And it won the Hugo. I bought this one. I bought a few Hugo winners from the kind of what I think are actually the real golden days of the Hugos, the 80s and 90s, where you see a massive mix of stuff come in, and early noughties come in for interest. I think it's basically a lot more monotone now, monochrome indeed, in terms of it's all one type of thing, all one type of experience. And I think during that period you got a massive mixture of popular sci-fi and fantasy, niche stuff, experimental stuff. And I think that's the right kind of thing to talk about. So Hominids, I'm looking forward to. I don't know if it'll be good. It's a Hugo Award winner, so it might be. A Appendix N entry that I'm going to want to read, or some of, is A. Merritt. Merritt was an early sci-fi writer. I have Dwellers in the Mirage, The Ship of Ishtar, and The Moon Pool with it, which was an inspiration for Lost, hence the dubious cover. And yeah, again, I'm sure it's going to be worthwhile. It's classic sci-fi fantasy. You know, there's going to be stuff in it that is worth reading about. Some of the concepts, like it's an alien ship themed after ancient Egyptians, that sort of thing is quite exciting. The guy is possessed by the personality of a kind of ancient figure. Those are interesting ideas. We'll see if they hold up in terms of style, but I'm sure I'll enjoy them at that level. Ancillary Justice. It is a sort of, I think it's sort of military sci-fi. The only novel to have won all of science fiction's most prestigious awards and marks the debut of a bold new voice in the genre. This is Anne Leckie, 2014 winner. Green Mars, the sequel to Red Mars, the second in the Mars trilogy. And I've got the third one. I actually recently received it, Blue Mars. But Green Mars is after the dramatic events that kind of close the first period on Mars, and this is, I guess, both the next stage of the politics and the next stage of the terraforming or areoforming or whatever. And Red Mars was one of my books of the year. It was really very good. It had a depth of character I really enjoyed, and its hard sci-fi near future nature was something I really enjoyed as well. So this won the Hugo, where Red Mars didn't. The Red Mars won the Nebula. This one the Hugo, and I think the Nebula. This is, this and its sequel Blue Mars are considered to be better than Red Mars, so I'm kind of expecting that they will be better. Canticle for Leibowitz. I've not read it. Obviously, far future. There are monks who try to preserve ancient scientific knowledge and other things like that. But there's obviously some confusion about what that is and how it works. By Walter M. Miller Jr. Green Mars is by Kim Stanley Robinson. Canticle for Leibowitz, Walter M. Miller. Obviously, it's a classic of the genre. Very much one I need to fill in. Some people love it. Some people, I think I've read maybe one or two or heard one or two reviews recently, which are more like, oh, it's really interesting, but doesn't necessarily finish amazingly or fascinatingly. Another book you have to pretend I have, because it's en route. Book 2 of the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson, the Neuromancer trilogy. They're not, I think, plot and character tied per se, but setting tied. And I really enjoyed Neuromancer, one of my books of the year again. And the second book is called Count Zero, I think. The third in the trilogy is called The Mona Lisa Overdrive, which is just a fantastic name for a book. I don't know if I'll enjoy Count Zero. They were reviewed. I think most people think the second and the third one are better written than Neuromancer, though they don't quite have the cachet Neuromancer does. We'll see. But again, that's something I feel confident about as that's a good bet. 2 books by Lois McMaster Bujold and the Vorkosigan Saga are currently on my list, which will be, and technically a short story as well, Brothers in Infinity, Borders of Infinity, Brothers in Arms, and Mirror Dance. Bujold is really underrated, I think. She is one. I remember running into, when talking about the Hugos with someone, running into a really sniffy attitude toward the high point of the Hugos, in my view, the 80s, 90s, early noughties, where you have a massive variety of genre and style and format. Someone saying basically people like Bujold were really just popular sci-fi, and I'm like, man, if I could write popular sci-fi that well and sell that many units, I'd be both artistically and financially happy. She's a really interesting author, really creative. In the Vorkosigan Saga, covers a massive variety of sci-fi subgenre and theme. Her fantasy is also very good. Try Curse of Chalion, Paladin of Souls for that. Fine. So yeah, again, I'm confident. I mean, also in the end, they're relatively short books. They are not really novella length. They are a bit longer generally than that. But they are very much short novels by modern standards. So Mirror Dance is 250 pages. Brothers in Arms is 250 pages. Mirror Dance is 400. Wow, that's long for Bujold in her sci-fi. The sci-fi book I'm most looking forward to and most confident about really is, this is 2 novels technically, Book of the New Sun, Volume 2, Sword and Citadel, that is Sword of the Lictor, Citadel of the Autarch. Books 1 and 2, Volume 1 were my book of the year in 2021. Probably by a margin. Some of the few books I have spent time thinking about since, in one of those haunting books, one of those books that sticks with you. So I'm confident about that. No one thinks that it gets worse. No one ever says, oh yeah, the first 2 really good, second half bit naff. So that's books I read with my kids and sci-fi. Let's do classics and I guess ghost stories too. Audiobook I'm not far from finishing. I listen to audiobook when doing chores, and it's usually a classic, and it's been a bit slower the last few months due to me shifting what I've been doing, but the Barsetshire Chronicles #1, The Warden by Anthony Trollope. I'm most of the way through that. I will do a review probably this month, and yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. I mean, there are some real kind of eccentricities in how Trollope writes and constructs stuff, but I've enjoyed it so far, so no doubt it'll finish okay. Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan, classic spiritual book, allegory, massive influence on English literature since. And John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. This was actually a Christmas present from 2020, which I wanted to read last year but didn't quite get around to. I have read 3 shorter Steinbecks, The Moon is Down, Of Mice and Men, and Tortilla Flat, and have a lot of time from. He seems to have been maybe one of the worst people to publish popular fiction, but it has lasted in many respects better than a lot of parallel 20th century American fiction. Who cares about John Updike? There's another guy I was thinking about where I was like, yeah, that guy, no one reads him anymore, and I can't even remember his name, and that's how much no one talks about him anymore, despite the fact I'm fairly sure he's a Pulitzer winner. Guesses in the comments. But Grapes of Wrath I'm looking forward to. His style is so good, his ambition and his kind of structure, his vision of structure, I guess, is so good. And Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden are the big 2, aren't they? So I'm confident in that one. Russell Kirk. I've got a couple of Russell Kirk reviews up. Great ghost story writer. This is technically not a ghost story. It is a Baroque romance, A Creature of the Twilight. But, man, the glare off that dust cover wrap is dramatic. He is forgotten and underrated for a few reasons. One thing is I think the ghost stories were out of fashion at the time, and still are. It's telling that this reprint is from a political and philosophical publisher. He's better known as a philosopher than as a ghost fiction writer. But Bradbury, Madeline Engel, they both say who's the best ghost fiction writer after M.R. James in the 20th century. So this one stars a major character, is about a major character in the Kirk-verse. Manfred Arcane, who is very significant elsewhere, is his great character. The bastard son of a Scottish laird who ends up in post-colonial Africa, navigating the chaos and taking advantage of it. I think I will enjoy it. I don't doubt I'll enjoy it. I don't know if there'll be some of the structural issues that there were in Lord of the Hollow Dark, which was in my top 10 for the year. I don't know if some of the themes in the book may end up jarring or feeling strange. We'll see. But I know I'll enjoy the writer at least. I'll also be reading a couple of Agatha Christie books this year based on. I tried to read them before we watched the matching film from the big adaptations, the great adaptations, which is David Suchet for Poirot, the ITV adaptations, therefore, and the Joan Hickson BBC Marple. I don't buy into the criticisms of Suchet as Poirot, and I think it's pretty obvious Hickson is the definitive Marple. And much more perhaps in a way than Suchet is the definitive Poirot, and those films are generally speaking good quality, and I love the books. Christie is a great mystery spinner and also a great psychologist, and so I recommend her mysteries if you have not read them. Maybe start with something like, do you recommend just read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd her best, or do you go for something which is more typical and classic and approachable, something like Death on the Nile perhaps, or Five Little Pigs? Those are both good ones. Or something from a slightly later period that's weird. The Hollow is a very good, slightly different style Poirot. But there we are. I've no doubt, again, I'll enjoy them. It may well be that I managed to fall onto one of the weaker ones. You know, not all of them are classics. Finally then, because I won't worry, I usually list poetry under my fiction reading list, but it's different enough that I won't cover it here. Let's do some fantasy. Fantasy is, given how well sci-fi performed in 2021, maybe I should have more sci-fi. Sci-fi really outperformed fantasy in terms of top 10, but nonetheless, I've gone for the same kind of balance where I've got something like 15 or 20 fantasy books and about 8 or 10 sci-fi books. Probably, let's say a 2-to-1 ratio. But I guess I find fantasy probably easier, especially in the mid-range of stuff that's quite good. I find it easier really to read, probably. So, a couple of rereads, which I have bothered to get down so you can enjoy the excellent Josh Kirby covers. Mort and Weird Sisters from the Discworld series by Sir Terry Pratchett. Mort, along with Equal Rights, was one of the first two I was bought. Not the first I read. I read Hogfather. No, Hogfather was the first I was bought. I read that. Then I read Colour of Magic, Life Fantastic. Then I was bought Equal Rights and Mort. So this has been with me several decades and is well loved. These are both good, Weird Sisters particularly. And so, I don't, not much more to say. They will be good, I'm sure, this time. Amero 2, The Quest for Cush by Charles Saunders. That is a very... What is the name of the dodgy Conan cover author from the magazines? It's very like that. But Amero, I reviewed the first volume, who was Saunders' intentional desire to create... A black Conan or black Tarzan would be reductive, genuinely. There's much more going on. But his attempt to create a pulp hero who can engage with the fantasy Africa of Saunders' own creation, rather than having so sometimes a very alienating view of Africa. So yeah, I have no doubt I will enjoy that. Imro 1 is good. Watch the review. Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Yes, the Hobb train has come to town. This one, it's interesting, from the Farseer trilogy, this is one of the ones where people like, I think people like 1 and 3 and found 2 frustrating, but a lot of people obviously really loved 1. I also loved the covers with the coats of arms. I think that's a really nice style. But yeah, we will see. I realise another book I haven't got out, I don't think, but which I will be reading, again on the popular train, or I will try to read, is Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, Malazan Book of the Fallen, Book 1. It's sort of the thing, I don't know whether that falls into the kind of like, Owen likes slightly strange and angular stuff, or if it falls into the Wheel of Time camp. That might sound controversial for Malazan fans, but what I mean is, I don't know if I'm going to be like, man, this is a very long epic fantasy series, and I have those, or if it's weird angular stuff. If it's weird angular stuff, if I'm honest, I'm likely to get on with it better. But we'll see. With Hobb, I think the depth of character and the beautiful prose that people talk about is going to get me. I'm on my next reread, and this is part of a buddy read with T from An Erudite Adventure, Tony, and David Wiley as well. Both good channels. Lord of the Rings. I will be starting, I guess, Fellowship soon. This is a 6-month read-along, so it's not particularly high pressure. I am looking forward to it. I have read Lord of the Rings now every decade since I got it. So I read it in the 90s, I read it in the noughties, I read it in the 10s. This will be my 20s reread. And, I mean, it's the best fantasy novel ever, isn't it? So I don't really think there's much more need to be said. The Silmarillion, though, maybe needs more defence. I think the Silmarillion is, from my 2 reads of it, or my read and a half perhaps, but I think it's 2. Not recent, though, reread. I think it is really beautiful. For the sons of Feanor that yet lived came down suddenly upon the exile of Gondolin and the remnant of Doriath and destroyed them. In that battle some of their people stood aside, and some few were rebelled, and were slain upon the other part, aiding Elwing against their own lords, for such was the sorrow and confusion in the hearts of the Eldar in those days. But Maethros and Maglor won the day. though they alone remained thereafter of the sons of Fëanor, for both Amrod and Amras were slain. Too late the ships of Círdan and Gil-galad the High King came hasting to the aid of the elves of Sirion, and Elwing was gone, and her sons. Then such few of that people as did not perish in the assault joined themselves to Gil-galad, and went with him to Balar, and they told that Elros and Elrond were taken captive, but Elwing with a Silmaril upon her breast had cast herself into the sea. It is a chronicle rather than a novel. It's an epic saga rather than a novel, but it is one of the great ones, and it is, as much as Lord of the Rings is, where we see, and this has to have some credit given to Christopher Tolkien too, therefore, as well, obviously, for editing it. This is where we see Tolkien's legend of England, his stuff of the modern nation of England, rather than of the ancient predecessor kingdoms, come together. So I'm looking forward to it. I wonder if I'll find it slow sometimes, or whether I will end up feeling like I want more detail. Will I be tempted into reading the full saga versions that have come out, mostly in the 10s, didn't they? Late noughties and 10s. I want to finish the complete tales of H.P. Lovecraft. I've read lots of Lovecraft, but I did pause on this and go into other stuff just because I wanted to get some other stuff read. And Lovecraft, I often read slowly, not always, but often. I think his... I find him fascinating, his images haunting, his plot's often quite interesting, but I don't find him in the stylistic sense a compelling author, and I think that means I read him slowly. But I've no doubt I'll read. There are a few big stories. I think the Whisper in Darkness I haven't read. There's a few big stories I've still got to read for Lovecraft, which I think I'm going to like. Elric 2 and 3, Sailor on the Seas of Fate and Stormbringer. It depends, but are they 2 and 3? They were published 2nd and 3rd, and they are the original Elric saga. There are a couple of others, I think 3 others, that fit into the main timeline of Elric. I like these Moorcock collection covers. I think they're quite nice. It is a shame that my Moorcock hit rate is spotty. I think I'm at something like maybe 1 in 3. Well, let's say I've read the whole Dance at the End of Time trilogy, with some moments of humour and enjoyment, but mostly meh. Hawkmoon, I read the first saga. It ended strong, but was amongst the weaker books I read last year, or weaker sets of books. Elric 1, though, Elric and Melibene, I quite enjoyed, and I'm going to remain optimistic, I guess, on those. Another Appendix N/classic entry, like Elric is Appendix N too, is Saldren's Garden, Lyonesse, Book 1 by Jack Vance. I also have Planet of Adventure by Vance. This is a sort of, well, pre-Arthurian sort of story. Vance is a good writer and a great creator and inventor who has obnoxious habits as a writer, and that's most obvious in the Kugel books of what I've read. People say it comes up elsewhere as well, but I think I remember when people talk about some of the things I just don't enjoy in Vance. I think Saldren's Garden, people are saying, seem fairly free of that. So let's not keep our fingers crossed. It'll be a good experience, I'm sure, but be hopeful it's not just a good experience, but a very good one. Thomas the Rhymer by Ellen Kushner. It is a fantasy masterwork entry. It's recommended by Neil Gaiman, who I actually think Gaiman has surprisingly spotty taste for an incredibly insightful critic. But it's about Thomas the Rhymer in Elfland. I mean, that's sort of the sort of thing I like, isn't it? So here's hoping. On a similar note, Time and the Gods, which is actually a collection including Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany, also in Fantasy Masterworks. I've not read. Maybe I've read a small amount of Dunsany. I've not read much. It's Appendix N, and it's foundational to all fairy stories in the genre since. So it's a necessary book for my education, let's say. Much as with MacDonald, who's another early fantasy writer I have actually read a bit of, I don't. It's hard to say, and I guess is it Eddington? What's his name? The guy who did Worm Roberus. You've got people who I think are rated well stylistically, but probably in terms of their structure and their fictional vision tend to be more limited and more narrow because of the sorts of tropes they're trying to work with, the way they're building something. That's not a criticism or anything. In fact, those intensity can be as good or better than breadth of vision. but I think it is a thing where I'm like, oh, I wonder how that I will find that. That's actually one kids book I haven't mentioned because we only read it occasionally, which is we're reading, Joe and I, my eldest, are reading The Princess and Curdie sometimes by MacDonald. David Gemmell has one entry. I've read a bunch of Gemmell series. This is actually technically a Draenei book. This is about Skilgannon the Damned, but there's 10 Draenei books and there's 2 Skilgannon books, one of which is main Draenei timeline. Then this one is something weird is happening in the far future, and is sort of the capstone on the whole sequence. So I'm going to read that. I wouldn't be surprised if more Gemmell, like a reread of the Riganti saga or more Stones of Power of that big cycle, that 7 books or whatever, comes in. I wouldn't be surprised because Gemmell is easy to read, creative, and very good at, yeah, like I said with Christie, good at psychology, good at understanding why humans do things and what matters to us, and has a moral vision too. Book I need to finish. Well, I'll restart. I read a few chapters, then I thought I'll go to something else, because I had other things I needed to read really. But Empire of Gold by Chakraborty. This is Diver Bad Trilogy 3. She is a good writer with amazing world building, kind of shaky pacing, and hey, there is a kind of ancient genie young woman love thing, which well, in fact there's a love triangle there, which is not always to people's tastes, shall we say, Mari, but I've no doubt that I'll at least want to know what happens in this story of the kind of secret genie kingdoms covering 19th century Asia and North Africa. Similarly, another one I need to finish. I've just finished the 2nd book before the new year, so only 1 book of this, Annals of the Witch World, the first of the Witch World trilogies. There are loads of books in this. I thought there were like 6, but there's like 12 or 15 books in the Witch World by Andre Norton. The 3rd one is called, contents page, it's not called that, Year of the Unicorn. I really liked Sign of the Unicorn by Roger Zelazny, but just because it's got a unicorn in does not mean it's anything I like. Witch World is an interesting world where there is one ethnicity, basically, one nation containing that ethnicity is ruled by witches with magic. There are gates from different worlds into that world. In that sense, it's weirdly a sort of Narnia, if you think about it. And different people come through, and some of those people are pretty much normal humans. Some are dark technological masters, and the world, therefore, is really interesting, and the characters do have a degree of verite to them. But Norton is not a stylist. It's all very workaday. So I am looking forward to finishing that trilogy, and it's Appendix N. I'll look forward to talking about it, but I'm looking forward to enjoying what there is to enjoy and moving on with my life. Another trilogy to finish is Last Argument of Kings. I've read a bit of this. I've read 50 pages. I think I paused in mid-December, and I'll be getting back to it fairly soon, I imagine, probably this month as well, of the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. He's great at character. He's kind of weird with plot, because though technically stuff happens in his books, most of it doesn't feel that important, even though it's really important. That is a criticism of him, but it doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the first 2. It's why I kept going with the trilogy. So I have no doubt I will enjoy the characters. It's a long book. That's maybe the one thing to say, is it is a chonker, isn't it? 700 pages. Appendix N entry, World of Tears, Philip Jose Farmer, will be added in place of, because I finished one of the Norton books I had on the list, so I'll add this in place. Technically, I think this is also a set of short books, so maybe it's 3 140 page books or whatever, 150 page books. One of my buddies on BookTube, Jeff, he has not recommended against it. We're talking about Farmer, and he said it's patchy in quality, and I hear that this first book is the best of the World of Tears books, and it probably starts stronger with the first novella and maybe gets weaker. It's partly part of a project, so I can put up with patchy quality. Like with Norton, she's interesting, but not great. The same with Farmer with this. If it's patchy, that's fine. I will live with it. But the idea, I mean, it is a multiverse book, and I think that's always an interesting thing to see how ideas have developed, how tropes have developed in the genre. I've got 2 Forgotten Realms books, which are Salvatore's Homeland. I just saw Andrew DNF this in tears. in the end, I doubt I'll DNF it. It's 340 pages. If I'm not enjoying it, I will skim. But it's, good to see where a very important thread that the fantasy anti-hero modern fantasy anti-hero takes a major cue from D&D, especially via Drizzt. So it's important in the genre in general. The other one is As Your Bonds with Dragonbait, the mute but able to give out communicative smells like pheromones. Dragonbait as Sawyer, this guy, and then this lady who's his friend. And she's called Alias. She's in big trouble. She's a sellsword, a warrior for hire, and an adventuress. She awoke with a series of twisting magical blue sigils inscribed in her arms and no memory of where she got them. You should go to a doctor for that. I've put this under fantasy. You could put it in classics too, but Journey to the West, one of the 4 great Chinese novels. I have the other 3 in the same. I quite like these sets. They're old translations. I don't know if there are much better new ones. This is by Jenna. I think I have one by Whaley, for instance. We're talking that age. But yeah, my worry with this, when I put it down the list, is that we are talking about something that is overall longer than Lord of the Rings. We'll talk about something that's probably like 2,400 pages in this edition, rather than like 1,300 pages, so nearly twice the length. Whether or not I'll get the time to finish 4 volumes of it, we will see. But learning about the original version of Tripitaka and Monkey travelling the world, trying to rescue sutras, that interests me. I particularly enjoyed. I've watched some of the TV show Monkey, but I particularly enjoyed the Adventures of Monkey. Is it Australian or New Zealand show? I think it's an Australian show, which ran a couple of seasons on Netflix, which was just good fun. I mean, there were some sillier bits and some bits I was like, yeah, is that really a modern adaptation I want? But I enjoyed it. This is both a classic, the next one, and also, like Hob, it's both a classic and something which has kind of gone through a faddish phase of rereading, but which I've long wanted to read. I've read a short story or a novella in this world from Legends. It is Dragonbone Chair, Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, Thorn 1. I forget, was it called Fisher King or something? There was a novella in the Legends collection, which is a fantastic collection. Legends and Legends 2 are some of the best novella collections ever, and it's a shame that we don't have more novella collections. I think it's a really good format. But it was meant to introduce people to different worlds. My parents, I guess, someone at least, got me one of the sub-volumes of Legends 1 because it had a Pratchett novella in it, and it had a Pratchett cover by Josh Kirby. And that introduced me to George R.R. Martin with The Hedge Knight, which I still maybe think is the best thing that he's written in the Song of Ice and Fire universe. And it had Anne McCaffrey, the first McCaffrey I read, and it had Tad Williams. Yeah, it's long. People don't give it mixed reviews, but I think people certainly give it different kinds of reviews. And I'm still ooky even post Abercrombie about what people mean by grimdark. Basically, if something's misanthropic, I'm not interested, I guess is what I'd say. But I don't really think Abercrombie is misanthropic. I don't think George R.R. Martin is grimdark in the way people describe. So, hey, we'll see. That one could be, you could kind of see that one being like a major hit, if top 10 this year, or you could see it being a major flop. Finally, I think let's just have a look through this list, shall we? Yeah, I think that is everything apart from this last one, which I'm currently reading, which I can't talk enough about this series really. The Mythigo Wood Cycle, Book 3, The Hollowing. I am 50 pages in, and it is already screwing me up. These are intense, crazy, wild, visionary books that are not afraid to take you emotional and intellectual and spiritual places that you weren't expecting. The first 2 books from the Fantasy Masterwork series and are fairly easy to get. The others you kind of have to search around for a bit to get a decent price on. There are, I think there are only 7. I think there are 5 novels and 2 short story collections, possibly, or something like that. So there's not that many to get. But The Hollowing is another book, and for the 3rd time, it's a book somewhat about fathers and children, or about brothers and sisters. In this one, Alex is a damaged and visionary child. Little does he know the distorted creations of his mind are alive inside nearby ripe wood, because ancient woodland, particularly oak wood, sucks up our cultural engrams and makes them real. When the forest claims him, his father goes in pursuit along with a scientific expedition looking for the secret of mythagogenesis. But inside Ripe, Alex has created 100 forms of the trickster, all of them seeking their maker, and all of them deadly. And that sounds fun enough, but I cannot easily describe to you both that he's got a very good style, but a very distinctive style, but also just that the sometimes hallucinatory vision, sometimes the emotional, it's almost a ruthlessness with which he, or at least a candidness and openness with which he puts out the kind of emotional landscapes of the character or characters. Holdstock is a very, very important author, and 35 years on or whatever from his first the first Mythico books, he is an author who requires rereading, who will last. I think I'd feel fairly confident that his books will be interesting in 60 or 100 years time. So yeah, I am reading The Hollowing. It is already messing me up, and that will, along with Andre Norton, probably be the first fiction books I finish in the year. What are you planning to read this year? What are your headlines? What do you think of the books I've mentioned? What are other recommendations you might want to have on that list? Tell me in the comments. Till next time.